Imagine you're walking around a busy outdoor mall, or you're out at a busy restaurant, and you're sitting there looking around, judging other people about what they're doing. If you're doing that, you're also assuming that everyone is doing that to you. And how uncomfortable of a feeling is that? To feel like everyone is looking at you. It's not like you're walking down the red carpet and you're feeling like everyone is checking me out, right? This is great. No, you're sitting there thinking everyone is thinking negatively about how you look, about what you're doing, about what you're eating. Because if we have this willingness to go and judge other people, like every which way we turn, we're looking at someone and seeing some sort of fault, seeing some sort of something that they're doing wrong. When we go about in the world, we're assuming that everyone around us is also doing that same thing, which means, yes, they're doing it to me. Hey guys, this is Coach K, and you're listening to the Making Changes, Breaking Barriers podcast, where we talk about you. This is about you, your mind, and your path. So I'm really excited to be back recording this episode. The last couple weeks we've had Cora on the podcast, which I always really love having Cora on the podcast, especially, or anytime we have any guests on the podcast. But I will say I do really, really enjoy doing these solo episodes for you guys as well. I feel like, you know, even talking about the benefit I get from it, I get to really dive deep into a certain topic that I feel very passionate about and is very relevant in my life right now, and something that maybe has been in, you know, the forefront of my mind and I can't stop thinking about it. I just get to dive into this, and then I get to share all of my thoughts and all of my learnings with you guys, which is really one of the big reasons why I started this podcast in the first place. So I am very excited to be back recording this episode for you guys, and I really hope that you guys enjoy it. So before we jump into today's topic, one thing that I want to ask of you guys, if you have not gone into the Apple Podcast app or the Spotify app, which is where most of my listeners listen to this podcast, and left a rating and a review for the Making Changes, Breaking Barriers podcast, I would greatly appreciate it. Even if you're new and if you've listened to a few episodes, or if you're someone who comes back every week. I think this is episode number 42. So I've almost been doing this for a year. So if you've been tuning in for the last few weeks or for the long haul, I would super appreciate it if you go into one of those apps right now and leave a rating and review. You can scroll down to the bottom normally, and there's a place where you're going to click leave a review, and it will ask you just to leave even just a sentence or two, just what this podcast means to you, and then a 5-star rating. I would super appreciate it. Not only does that make me feel good to see those, but most importantly, that just helps get my podcast out there more and more to more people. With the more reviews that come in, those podcast platforms will push the podcast out to more people. So I would greatly appreciate it if you spend the time to do that. All right, let's jump into today's topic, which, like I said, I'm really excited to get into. So it was a few weeks ago now where I heard this quote, and the quote was, "See their growth rather than their pain." See their growth rather than their pain. And sometimes, I mean, this goes a long way back, but sometimes I'll just hear this quote, whether it's a quote from a podcast, whether it's a quote from a book, it could be a quote from a TV show. I can't tell you guys the amount of times when I think this goes back to my college days, I'd be watching Grey's Anatomy. And if you're a longtime Grey's Anatomy, watcher, at the very end, it normally would be Meredith, the main character in the show, or it would be another character, but they would do this sort of monologue thing where, actually, I think it's called a montage, where they'd be showing like different scenes, but there would be the voice of one of the characters playing over it, and it would get kind of deep, and there would be some, thoughtful reflection type quotes in there in the monologue. And I can't tell you how many times I'd be listening to that and like something would just stick out to me, and I would go into my notepad on my phone and I would write it down. Because then what I really love to do is I love to go back and I love to read that quote and think about what that really means, and more specifically what it really means to me. So when I heard this quote, "See their growth rather than their pain," it really stuck out to me, and it took me some time to think about, what does this really mean to me? And one of the things that really stuck out to me is that we have this opportunity, or this choice even, to look at someone else's life, to look at someone else's actions and decide, are we going to look at the good Or are we going to look at the bad? Are we going to judge? Or are we going to show empathy? Because if all we're doing is looking at someone's pain, to me, what that means is we're looking at all of the actions and all of the behaviors that are a reflection of that pain that we are feeling. We all know how hard life is. And that's never an excuse for bad behavior or bad action. So please don't take that away from what I'm saying right now. But it can cause those things. Those are the realities. I mean, how many people in this world have drug addiction, have alcohol addiction, are in toxic relationships, have chronic toxic behaviors because of maybe some sort of pain that they've gone through and not worked through it. And everyone has the responsibility to work through those things. But at the same time, as an outsider, as someone who is viewing those things, what is my reaction to that? Am I judging or am I showing empathy? And this is what we're going to dig into today, because one of the thoughts when I heard that quote again, see their growth rather than their pain, that really stood out to me when I started thinking about this difference between judging and showing empathy and the effect that has on the person who is judging or showing empathy, not necessarily on the person who's being judged or being shown that compassion, but on us, on the person judging or showing empathy, is huge, okay? And one of the things that when I started looking into this more and doing some research that really stood out to me and felt so real was that when we judge other people, we isolate ourselves. And before I dive completely into that, I kind of want to talk about this misconception that I think is out there when it comes to showing empathy. And I'm going to get into like what really means to show empathy. But I believe that there's this misconception out there that if we show empathy to a certain person or maybe even a certain group or a certain culture, that means that we need to join that group. Or I think that there's even this misconception that if we show empathy towards that person or whatever it is, that we then need to even agree with every action of that person or every action of that group. And this is truly a misconception. That is not what empathy means. Empathy does not mean if we show compassion or if we, try and take time to reflect and understand a perspective of another person or an experience another person is having, that does not mean that we then need to go and join that group or that we agree with every action that group has. Okay, that is not what empathy means. And I'm going to get into a little bit more what showing empathy really does mean, okay? Judging. Let's get back to judging, okay? Because this is one of the big takeaways I had when I heard this quote, see their growth rather than their pain, is that we have this choice. We have this choice to either judge someone or a situation or show empathy, okay? When we judge other people, what does this mean? When we judge other people, we are forming opinions. We're forming evaluations, or we're even forming conclusions about those people or about those groups based on certain things, like the actions that they're taking, based on their appearance, even based on their belief, or really any other observable aspect. And here's the key. We're doing those things and we're forming those things without fully understanding their circumstances, without fully understanding their motivations or their experience. So judging really involves making assumptions about someone's character, about their behavior, or even about their worthiness to be on this earth with us without having all of the relevant information. I like to think of judgments as these quick thoughts. Okay. And it's not that they'll always be quick, because sometimes they're not, right? We can have this judgment that we've had for years and years and years and years. But why I think quick is still a good way to describe them is because I don't think a lot of the times when we have judgments, there's been a lot of time put into reflection and into understanding and trying to make these connections and understanding someone's experience to then say, okay, now that I've done this reflection and tried to do this understanding and this research and looking into why this might be the case, now how do I feel? How do I feel about this? Do I still have the same opinion? Do I still have the same belief? And so that's why I like to think of judgments as this quick thought, right? It's something that comes without a lot of understanding of a certain situation. There's a lot of different ways that we can judge someone. And I'm just going to go through these kind of quickly because I do really want to paint this picture, because I think it's easy, and I challenge you as one of my listeners here in this moment to really be honest with yourself, because I think it's easy to hear these things sometimes and say, I never judge. I never do that. But the reality is that probably the majority of us fall into this trap from time to time. And that's okay, right? That doesn't mean that we're terrible people, but I also think that it's something to recognize and understand so that maybe we can just make the frequency of these judgments less and less, because as I'm going to get into, I only think that's going to benefit us more and more. Okay. So different kinds of judgments that we can make. One is making assumptions, right? We can assume things about a person or a personality, and we can assume the intentions behind those things with very limited information about why that person may be doing that thing or why that person may believe this versus that. Okay. This can also very much come from stereotypes. We just have this stereotype of someone, so we assume that this is going to be the case. We can all probably think of an example where we or someone we know just has made an assumption. If you ever felt like someone has made an assumption about you without all of the relevant information, you probably know that that doesn't feel very great. Right? So making assumptions is one way we judge. We can also criticize, right? We can find fault, and we can even express disapproval of someone's actions and choices or beliefs without considering their perspective. We have to be very careful about giving advice, all right? Or even criticizing, to take it one step further. Can you really put yourself in that person's shoes? I think it's great to give advice. I love being coached. I actually love getting advice from other people. I think I was reading something the other day, and it was saying sometimes instead of asking what advice do you have for me, you can ask do you feel like there's anything that I'm missing, right? Because sometimes just getting a perspective from someone else can be so helpful. And to me, it never feels like I have to take everything that they're saying and put it into action. That's my choice, right? It's my choice to say, is what they're saying important to me? But sometimes there are gems in there, right? Sometimes there are gems in the advice people are giving to us. But when that advice becomes critical and we're expressing disapproval in someone's actions, we have to be careful, because just like any other judgment, like I'm going to get to here in a minute, it's very isolating, both for the person who's judging and for the person who is being judged or criticized in this instance. Another form of judging is labeling, right? When we assign fixed and often negative labels to individuals, we reduce them to this simple category, right? Rather than recognizing their complexity. We can all think of, I'm not going to just go through certain ones right now, but we can all think of certain labels that are out there. And when we just label that person, okay, I'll give one example. When we label someone a athlete and we believe that that means that they can't do anything else, right? They can't have a voice when it comes to politics. They can't have a voice when it comes to women not being paid equally or whatever it may be. We're judging that person. We think that we're simplifying their ability as a human on this earth, which is a form of judgment. All right. So again, like I was saying, sometimes we think about judgment just as one of these things, but it is all of them. So we need to be careful. Another form of judgment is gossiping. How often are you engaging in conversation that involves spreading rumors or negative information about someone, right? Gossiping is terrible. I'm not saying that I never fall into that trap, because sometimes I do, but I would love if every conversation I ever had did not involve talking poorly or negatively about anyone else. This is just something that I think if we could eliminate somehow out of our world, out of our society, out of each and every one of our lives, we would be so much better off. But obviously gossiping is a form of judging. So like I said already, when I first heard that quote, one of the big conclusions I had from it is that when we choose to see other people's pain and when we choose to judge them based on their behavior, that's probably a result of some sort of pain. I think it's obvious that this is not beneficial to the person who's being judged, right? I think that's where our mind goes first. I think that's very clear, right? If we take it to the extreme level, I mean, think about someone being bullied. Obviously, the person who's being bullied is going to suffer here. Okay, that person is the victim. That person is not going to benefit. But I think sometimes what we forget, and I think if we can have more of this understanding of the effect it actually has on the person who is doing the bullying or the person who is making the judgments, it might actually help reduce it, because when we realize the effect it's having on ourselves, we're selfish beings, right? And we want to live the best lives that we can. And so if this can better my life by actually trying to work on this pattern I have of judging, then maybe I'll be more willing to make a change. Okay. So when we judge other people, any of those variety of ways that I just talked about, we isolate ourselves. Think about how isolating it is to be in a world where you feel like everyone is different than you. Everyone has some sort of wrong that you would never do, right? Everyone has some sort of character flaw that you don't agree with. Everyone has some sort of belief system that you just feel like is wrong. That is super isolating. And I've talked about it on this podcast before, but community and having a community of support is so important for everything that we do in our life. I talk a lot about it in the sense of like anytime we're trying to make a change, our community is important. But in any sense of our life, having that community is so important. So if we're doing something that is working against that is taking our community away from us, that is isolating us, okay, that's never going to be a great thing. So why is judgment so isolating? One reason is that judging gives us a limited understanding. All right. When we judge other people, we are literally closing ourselves off from being able to learn. And when I talk about learn, I'm talking about this in the sense of we're closing ourselves off from being able to understand different perspectives and being able to understand different belief systems and being able to understand different experiences. And doing so, closing ourselves off from that, isolates us, right? It isolates me from actually having a broader range of human emotions and in struggles even, okay? And when I isolate myself from being able to experience all these different human emotions and being able to understand all these different experiences, I'm limiting myself, right? I am limiting my understanding, and I am isolating myself from part of what it means to be human. Okay, so that's one form of isolation that judgment is going to create. Another thing that judgment is going to create is it's going to create this fear within ourselves of actually being judged. Okay, because if we have this willingness to go and judge other people, like every which way we turn, we're looking at someone and seeing some sort of fault, seeing some sort of something that they're doing wrong. When we go about in the world, we're assuming that everyone around us is also doing that same thing, which means, yes, they're doing it to me. All right, so here I am walking around. Imagine you're walking around a busy outdoor mall or a busy shopping center of some sort, or you're out at a busy restaurant and you're sitting there looking around, judging other people about what they're doing. If you're doing that, you're also assuming that everyone is doing that to you. And how uncomfortable of a feeling is that? To feel like everyone is looking at you. Everyone is judging negatively, right? They're not looking at you in it's not like you're walking down the red carpet and you're feeling like everyone is checking me out, right? This is great. No, you're sitting there thinking everyone is thinking negatively about how you look, about what you're doing, about what you're eating. I mean, all of these things. Another sort of internal negative effect that judging has is it creates this internal conflict within ourselves. For the most part, there may be some exceptions to this, but when we do something that we know is not great for us, it's not going to feel good, right? So if we have this habit of recognizing all of these negative things about other people and judging them for it, there's going to be this internal conflict within ourselves of, why am I doing this? I know this is harmful. I know this is unfair. I know this isn't great for the other person. I know this isn't great for myself. So why do I continue to do this, right? And that's also going to feel very isolating when we're going through some sort of like internal battle like that, right? Maybe that creates a shame cycle like we've talked about before, which is just this like deep burrowing of something inside yourself that you feel like you can't talk about, and you feel like you're the only person who's dealing with it, and it's terrible. I hope for no one that you are in a shame cycle, because it is not a fun thing to be in, okay? And I think this one goes without saying, but when we are judging other people, it's also going to be harder for us to seek emotional support. We all need emotional support, like in one way or the other. If you say that you don't need that, then I don't know. I just kind of don't believe you. Okay. We all need emotional support in some way, but it's going to be really hard for someone who is constantly judging other people for the struggles and the difficult times that they're going through to then seek out help, because they assume, again, that if they seek out help, the people that they're going to get help for are going to judge them for that difficult time or those difficult thoughts and emotions or whatever they're going through that they're having. Okay. So there are many reasons why this judgment is so isolating. And I think judgment is a really vicious cycle. When we judge other people, it actually makes us less empathetic. Like I was talking about, empathy is having this effort and this understanding to look at other people's actions and their beliefs and their experiences and just trying to understand them more. But the more that we judge and have these quick thoughts, the less we're going to be empathetic, right? So it's definitely a vicious cycle. But on the other hand, when we show empathy, and we're going to start to get into more of the positive side of things here, we start to understand and connect with a diverse range of emotions, with a diverse range of feelings and perspectives and experiences. And as we do this over and over and over again, we actually make it harder for ourselves to judge, right? Imagine a world or a scenario where you have this understanding of all of these different forms of cultures, all of these different perspectives, all of these different experiences. Like if you could actually put yourself in the shoes of the CEO of a company who works 70-hour weeks and is traveling around the world every week and who is spending very little time with their kids, if you could put yourself in the shoes of that person and have a good understanding of actually what they're going through, you may find that you show a lot more empathy for that person versus judge them. So if we could have this understanding of more and more and more perspectives and more feelings and more experiences, it's going to make it very hard for us to judge people because we have that understanding. So this is what I'm talking about. It could be a vicious cycle or it can be a really positive cycle as we start to go down the route of showing it and making the effort to understand and show empathy. I want to give an example that I think is really relevant in one of the communities that I'm a part of, and that's the queer community. And I've heard this story a lot. I've seen it on some of the queer movies or queer TV shows that I've watched, which I think is really cool, by the way, that there's more and more of those out there. Whenever I find one, I always watch it. I think that it's just so fun to see, queer people on TV, because at some point that really wasn't the case. Okay. This is kind of a newer thing, which is awesome. But the example that I have is take a parent of a kid, all right? And let's say those parents, for whatever reason, right? And this is what we, when we're showing empathy, we try and get a better understanding of why they believe this, but their belief system has always been that they don't want to have a queer kid. They think that there's something wrong about it, that there's something maybe against their religious beliefs about it, that there's something that just isn't right. There's something off about that. All right. And that's the belief system they have. So for their entire life, maybe they're not going out and they're not protesting that, gay marriage shouldn't be legal in the United States. They're not going that far, but they've just had this belief system that this isn't what we want our kids to grow up being. Okay. Now, let's say their kid does end up being queer. And at some point, let's say it's maybe high school, their kid comes out to them, and maybe it's their little boy and he comes out as being gay. And the parents maybe have a hard time with this at first, but they come around. And as time goes by, they start to understand a bit more, and they start to put themselves in their boy's shoes a little bit more, and they start to really embrace themselves in these experiences and start to learn more about the queer community and start to meet more queer people, and they get to know their son's boyfriend a little bit more, and they really enjoy him. And all of a sudden, over time, these parents start to build these empathetic feelings for the queer community. They start to show compassion for the queer community. And over time, there's less and less judgment over this community that for a very long time, they did hold these judgments against. This is a very common example, right? I give that's not just like a one-off. I mean, this happens probably on a daily basis, all right, over time. Now, why did this happen? Why were these parents able to make this switch? Now, my theory is that this was their kid. This is their son. So even though they did have this judgment, when they learned that their son was part of this community, guess what? They already had love for their son. They already have compassion for their son. They already have empathy for their son. So because they're already starting off with like a little bit of a leg up, it was easier for them to say, okay, I do love you, so I'm going to spend the time to understand. And I'm going to spend the time to try and put myself in your shoes so that I can, selfishly feel better about this situation. Okay. And then over time, they were able to come around, which is great. Now, what about the people in our life who we are surrounded by because they are our community, or they live within our society, or they live within our country, who we don't know personally, who we don't quote unquote love because they don't live in our house or they're not our neighbor? Okay. What about those people? How do we get to a point where even when we don't have that connection to them personally, we can still show them empathy? Because I think as a society, that's where we really falter, right? That's where we really have a hard time to sit down and take the time to understand a community that is not right there up in our face. But I think if we're able to do this, we'll be in so much of a better spot, which is my point. The reality is whether we judge or show empathy is totally in our control. There's not a lot of things that are totally in our control in this world, in this life. And whether we judge someone or show empathy for them is totally in our control. I think that's something that boggles my mind is we all know, especially once you're an adult, we all know how hard life is. Life is so freaking hard. Okay, even for me, who's like really fortunate. Okay, I still feel like life is really hard. I can't even imagine how hard it is for people who are less fortunate. Okay, life is really hard. There's people who are addicted to drugs. There's people who are addicted to alcohol. There's people who are homeless. There's, people in this world who are being oppressed and killed for, having a certain belief system. Life is freaking hard. And in some ways it's terrible. And I think the thing that's crazy to me is judging not only makes life harder for the person who's being judged, but it also makes life harder for ourselves. I want to make one thing clear. I'm not trying to claim that we can control our thoughts. All right. Especially if you are someone who does have a lot of judgments against other people. And like, maybe this podcast is resonating with you. Okay. That's okay. By the way, I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're listening. But what I want to make clear is that we can't control every single thought that pops into our head. Okay. We will have negative thoughts, whatever it may be. We will have negative thoughts that pop into our head. But I want to ask you, what do you do with that thought? When you have that one thought, just like when we talk about negative self-talk and positive self-talk, just when it comes to like confidence even, right? If I'm sitting there and I'm like, I may have a thought that pops in my head and it says, Christina, you're kind of a failure when it comes to your career. Okay. That thought pops into my head. I can't control that in that moment, but what I control is the next thought and the next thought, right? Do I allow the next thought to be like, oh, well, shit, I am a failure. Well, oh my God, I can't do anything. Oh my God, let me think about all the failures I've ever had. Oh my God, where do I go from here? No one's going to want to hire me. I'm never going to be able to switch jobs. I mean, all those things, right? Like, and then I get just paralyzed. Or does that initial thought come into my head saying, Christina, you've kind of failed at your career so far. And then do you say, well, that's not true. I've had many wins. Well, that's not true. Look at all these other positive things that happened. Well, that's not true. I'm actually very skilled at all these things, right? And then that switches to this positive self-talk. And over time, maybe those negative thoughts start to happen less and less. This is kind of the same way. We can't always control a judgment, but what's the next thought that comes into our head? And I think that's so important. Another example I wanted to give was about celebrities. So celebrities are very much in our face these days because of social media, right? We get a lot of inside looks into a celebrity's life, but the reality is we really don't, right? If you're following a celebrity on Instagram, for example, I mean, you're even celebrities who are posting the most amount of things, you're still only seeing a very small portion of this person's experience on this earth. Okay. So when we start seeing those things, it's very easy to make judgments about that person. Oh, I can't believe that they're doing this. I can't believe they said that on this live interview. Or I can't believe that they have that attitude about this certain thing or something along those lines, right? We've all done it. I've done it. I've definitely done that. Okay. Now, my example though is, what if you took that celebrity and Netflix makes a documentary about that celebrity? So now you're still not getting the full picture, but you're getting way more than you did on Instagram. You're maybe getting a 10 episode series just on this person. Now, how do you feel about them? I'm not saying 100% of the times your judgments change, but a lot of the times as you start watching episode after episode about this person, guess what happens? You start understanding a little bit more. You start being able to feel like you could walk, like you can step into their shoes and understand the experience. Oh, it maybe makes sense why they did this, and so on and so on. One example I can think about is the Taylor Swift documentary. Taylor Swift got a lot of flack for a lot of things that she did. Then she released her documentary, and it was like, I heard from multiple people, oh, you know what? I kind of liked Taylor Swift more after that. After you really got to see her like behind the scenes and got to be in her psyche a little bit and understand what she was going through. Guess what happened? You just spent more time trying to actually understand this person. You got a little bit more of an inside view, and it allowed you to show more empathy for them, right? Instead of just making these quick thought judgments. This is what we need more of in our world. Showing empathy to someone or showing empathy to a group of people versus judging them is going to allow us to just have so much more trust and connection with those people and with those communities. Empathy really fosters trust, and it strengthens social bonds, right? When people feel understood and supported, they're more likely to open up, and you can really like build way deeper connections with these people, which is so much better. Like friendships and relationships with deeper connections are so much better than just those like surface level interactions. Showing empathy versus judging is really going to help our mental health as well. I mean, just doing this, literally just showing empathy towards someone can reduce stress. We're all looking for ways to like help us reduce stress in this world that we live in, right? Try and show empathy. That's going to do that. It's going to help reduce anxiety and those feelings of isolation, which I've talked a lot about today. Okay. So what I want to leave you guys with today is a little bit of a call to action. And I'm not just going to say like, hey, go out and do some acts of kindness, because I don't really feel like this is what that's about. That's not necessarily what empathy is. It's just like going out and like being more kind to people. All right. To me, the call to action and wanting to show more empathy versus judgment is really taking the time. It's practicing reflection, right? It's taking the time to reflect and try and understand. Like, how often are you sitting there thinking, how can I understand this person's experience a little bit more? How can I understand this person's belief systems or perspectives a little bit more? I want you to sit, and maybe there's a situation out there that you're in right now that you feel like you have been showing a lot of judgment towards, whether it's someone you know personally or someone on TV or something, really someone within your career, anything along those lines. And I want you to sit down and I want you just to try and ask yourself why and reflect and understand maybe a little bit more about what's going on. And then I want you to reflect on how you feel after that. After you've spent that time, maybe that's in one sitting or a couple, to understand this, whatever it is, this perspective or this person a little bit more, then I want you to ask yourself, well, now how do I feel? All right, has anything changed? Do I feel like I can show a little bit more empathy and compassion for this person? Okay. And as a last reminder, okay, we can't control our thoughts all the time, right? We can't control every single thought that comes into our head. So don't get deflated if all of a sudden, like, you feel like, okay, hey, this is actually working, but bam, like another judgment comes back. It's not going to change within a day, right? We can't always control our thoughts, but we can control what we do with those thoughts, right? We can control the next thought and the next thought and the next action. All right, that's what I'm going to leave you guys with today. Go out and show empathy to the world. Try and reduce the amount of judgment that's happening out there. I think if we could all do that, we'd all be in a lot better place. So this is what I'm going to leave you guys with today. Changing your path will not be easy. It will be challenging. I'll say that over and over again, but it will be worth it. So go and do a self-check today. Are you on your path up your mountain? And if not, what path are you on?